If you ask me why I haven't recorded this video yet, I'm not too sure I would have a very good answer outside of I was intimidated because it is such a classic of classics. The fact that it's taken me this long to actually read this book is something that I'm still grappling with because I'm not sure why I haven't read it. Like, I don't think I have a very valid reason as to why I haven't read this book. And the book we're talking about today is Giovanni's Room by James Baldwin. I'm Quinn Moone, I write queer fairy tales, and today we'll be talking about Giovanni's Room by James Baldwin that I just read like in the last few months as part of my sad gay summer read. The fact that it's taken me this long fills me with the same sense of shame as I felt when I hesitated in buying Call Me By Your Name 10, 12-ish, 15-ish years ago. And instead I checked it out at the library and it was made almost immediately clear that I should have bought this book the moment I saw it. I have had this book on my list probably for 12, 15 years. It was right after I read Call Me By Your Name for the first time that this book kind of came on my radar as like a queer classic of classics. I don't know why I didn't pick it up until earlier this year, like 3 months ago. All that to say, I finally got it. If you haven't read it and you've debated reading it, please read it. Please read it. And it's been a minute since I finished Giovanni's Room because I'm a little intimidated and overwhelmed by what I'm gonna say. This book is a powerhouse of a book. It is a painful, beautiful story. I'm really scared of what I'm gonna say. Not that I'm gonna say anything bad. I actually don't even know what I'm gonna say. It's very unplanned. So I usually have like a script of some sorts or an outline. I don't got none of that right now. And we're just gonna like talk about the themes. So bear with me with what ends up happening. And I want to have a constructive discussion about the themes of Giovanni's Room. First and foremost, what is Giovanni's Room about? In Giovanni's Room, we follow David, an expatriate living in Paris, as he has just said goodbye to his girlfriend, Hella. They are debating getting married, but Hella thinks that she needs a little bit of time to think about it, so she goes away, leaving David by himself in Paris. This book opens and sets the expectation that something devastating has happened throughout the course of this book. The first sentence is actually amazing. I stand at the window of this great house in the south of France as night falls, the night which is leading me to the most terrible morning of my life. 2.5 pages in, we realize that David's life has kind of fallen apart. I am too various to be trusted. If this were not so, I would not be alone in this house tonight. Hella would not be on the high seas, and Giovanni would not be about to perish sometime between this night and this morning on the guillotine. So we are very early on set up to know terrible things happen throughout the course of this book that leads to everyone in David's life either leaving him or dying. Throughout the course of the book, we get to know a little bit more about David's past, and we come to quickly realize that he is an individual with a very volatile history. David is self-destructive, unpredictable, has bouts of violence. He's been in the military, he has run away across the ocean to Paris, and he comes from a broken home where from a very early age he realized he was different. That difference unfortunately led David down a very self-isolating, self-destructive path due to his inability to accept the fact that he was gay or bisexual. I believe, okay, let's not get ahead of ourselves. We are eventually told that David has had very violent encounters, very questionable liaisons because of the fact that he has so much self-loathing and has the inability to love himself and accept himself. None of his relationships are stable, with stable characters. They are always one-night stands, boys for hire, men for hire, violent one-night stands. And so we catch David falling into this vicious cycle again as Hella goes away on her trip to reflect on her life. Hella also is a very interesting character. She doesn't just take her role as the woman lying down either, but I will talk about Hella in a second. David is very active in the queer scene of Paris in the 1950s when this book is set, but he's an interesting character in that even the people that are his friends know that David doesn't like them. They all know that David has a need to feel superior to all of them, especially someone like Jacques, who is older, a bit of a queen. David needs to know that he will never be that. David needs to know that he will never be emasculated, that he will never be the woman of a relationship. And like so many main characters that I've read in my queer lit books, there is a sense of self-loathing in the idea that two men would dare, have the audacity, have the disgusting nerve to be in a stable relationship together. The other one that comes to mind is Leo from Separate Rooms. He finds that two men in a steady relationship is just disgusting, and how does anybody stomach that? David doesn't see a way that two men can have a stable relationship without one of them inevitably becoming the woman of the relationship. There's a very heteronormative perspective and worldview that David has about relationships and what defines a valid relationship. Not surprisingly, he was raised in what? If he's in Paris in the 50s, he was raised in the 40s, in the late 30s. We also learn very early on that he has come up in a hyper-masculine American household. His father had a definition of what a man was, and that typically was being violent, a workaholic, and absent. Yay. Not that that has changed much. So David carries this definition of what it means to be a man throughout his entire life, and that is the ideal that he is working towards. Unfortunately, that is not who he is. He has had to create and fabricate this persona of the ideal hypermasculine individual based off of his father as a model, despite the fact that he did not like his father. And he spends the entire book trying to keep this ideal image of himself while still being with Giovanni. You know, he wants to have his cake and eat it too. You can't do that because of the self-loathing and the toxicity that is inherent in David's interactions in his relationships. David also is very hard to get. He doesn't like seeming interested. He wants to be indifferent. He wants to seem like everything is happenstance. I just happen to meet this person and he just happens to get intimate with me. Like, the idea that David would ever acknowledge that he desired this person, that he desired this encounter, is a completely foreign concept to David. And that is what happens when he is alone in Paris, when Hella is off reflecting on her life, and Jacques takes him to a bar owned by his friend, whom I don't know how to pronounce, Guillaume. I'm gonna say Guillaume. I'm gonna say Guillaume. I'm really sorry. I don't know French to save my life. I'm so sorry. I'm gonna call him Guillaume. Jacques and Guillaume. And David. And Giovanni. So Jacques ends up at Guillaume's bar that night with David, who needs money, and it knows that if he's friendly enough to Jacques, he'll get it. He manipulates everyone around him. Everyone's aware that they're being manipulated. But they give David that grace because they also know that he is suffering and he is alone. And to a certain extent, they're like, fine, we will help, but they also do cut him off. Jacques doesn't just roll over for him anymore, especially because David doesn't give anything in return. He is very, I am not for sale. You do not get to buy me. You can't afford me even if you wanted to. David is broke. He is homeless. He has like nothing going for himself because he is so lost and wrapped up in his toxicity, in his lack of self-understanding, that he just has no purpose other than to find a menial job and try to be like a masculine provider. So he is so lost in himself that he really doesn't bring a whole lot to the table. Like, Jacques is very well off. Guillaume is part of a very old noble home in France. He is an aristocrat. Everyone is so much better off than David, but David continues to believe that he is superior to them because he doesn't succumb to these desires that all of them wear very openly. Jacques and Guillaume are older. They know that they're older. They know that a lot of the affection is fabricated and not real, but they are willing to buy into that fantasy because of the fact that the boys that give them that are willing to create it. It is just the horrible world that they live in due to the social restraints of being gay in the 50s. Everyone is literally just making the best of a bad situation. And then you got David. So the book starts off with David and Jacques ending up at this club, and that is when he meets Giovanni. I will always say that meeting Giovanni was like looking at the sun. It was like reading the sun. I met Giovanni, and as I was reading, I was blinded by his beauty. It was probably one of the most visceral character encounters I have had in my life because of how beautiful it was. It's at night, they're at this bar, but just Giovanni looks at David and it's just radiant. What they say about the tale of Genji, the Prince of Radiance, that is what Giovanni is, the Prince of Radiance. And their first interaction is so delicious. That's the only way I can describe it. It's scrumptious. David is being his typical asshole self, but he just succumbs to Giovanni's just mystery, to Giovanni's complete and indifference. Nobody knows. Giovanni is new to that bar. He is the mystery boy that has no background, that is this beautiful bartender that smiles at everyone, will flirt with you, will take your money, but won't have a drink with you, right? So Giovanni is this untouchable, beautiful character. So David's trying to play hard to get, and Giovanni's like, sweetie, you can't get me. Like, nobody's trying to get you, bro. The way that they interact with each other, like, I just sat there and my mouth was just agape. It was such a tense, wonderful interaction. It was so wonderful. David didn't realize he was screwed. He was gone. The moment he looked at Giovanni and Giovanni's like, what would you like to drink? David was gone. Like, ain't no coming back. His fate is sealed. And unfortunately, so is Giovanni's. And after that, they have this tumultuous, horrific, broken relationship. Giovanni becomes human. He loses his luster. He loses his job. David refuses to help. David refuses to build a life with Giovanni, even for this short amount of time, because it's emasculating. Unlike Giovanni, that does not believe he's emasculated, David can't come to terms with his own sexuality the way that Giovanni's like, all right, well, I like you, like, is what it is. That is not the case with David. And that comes back to haunt them, and it breaks their volatile, difficult relationship. Possibly some of the most heartbreaking lines I have ever read is when Giovanni is telling him, you're not hurting me because you love her. If you loved her, you wouldn't hurt me. It's Giovanni telling him, you're doing this because there's something about yourself that you don't like, and I know that I'm not enough for you, but I still love you the way you are. I still take you as you are, but all you see me as is a plague. All you see me as is this stench that's on you. And anytime you hold me and you pretend to love me, I know I am nothing. And it's Giovanni so in love with David, and David's inability to even say, I loved you too. I just can't. I think David haunts me because of the fact that he is such a scummy character to me. He is a lousy character, not only to Giovanni, but to Hella. Hella is such a self-aware woman. She is aware that she's not loved by her fiance. She's aware that she's not wanted in society. And she's aware that she's not allowed to have an opinion. As Hella goes off to reflect on her role, lack thereof, in society, she only comes back when she accepts that she's going to live in the shadow of David. She comes back and she tells David, neither of us will be absolutely happy, but at least I know my role and you have yours. I can't have an opinion. I'm supposed to follow you. So when David doesn't give Hella the grace of telling her what's happening, and it all comes out in this horrific, toxic manner that breaks Hella, because all she's trying to do is follow these dirty rules of this dirty world, I hated David all the more because Hella confronts him. I don't care that this is happening. I somehow felt that this was happening. I'm angry at you because you weren't a man. David spends the entire book paranoid about being emasculated. And the one time he can be a man, the one time Hella gives him the space to be a man, David can't be. She says, I can't lead. I'm supposed to follow you, but you couldn't be a man and lead me. You couldn't be a man and speak to me. She says, I have no voice, but you do, and you refuse to use yours. I deserved better. That is what Hella said. Hella didn't say, how dare you? Hella didn't say there's something wrong with you. Hella said, I deserved for you to tell me. Giovanni says, I deserve for you to tell me. And both of them say like they deserve that David told both of them and each other that David spoke to them at all. And David is just such a scumbag, and he can't. He's not a scumbag. He's just a product of his environment, a product of the society in which he grew up in. He is not scummy. I am angry at him for the way that he treated both Hella and Giovanni and his friends. His friends that were like willing to give him grace and pretend that they weren't being manipulated and that David had got the upper hand. He didn't. Jacques is rich. Guillaume is rich. David is the most lost, broken character of this entire book. And he is the one that breaks so many lives. And I can't fault him for it either because of the world that he grew up in. I can't fault him for not having a sense of himself when he locked his true self away when he was like 8 or 9 years old, the night he spent with Joey. Everything was so broken from the start. This book is just a reflection of the brokenness. The themes covered in this book There are many themes. The ones that I kind of want to touch upon are identity and sexuality, love and relationships, societal alienation and societal norms, which are disgusting things, masculinity and manhood, and shame and guilt. Under normal circumstances, I would break these up and have examples and supporting examples for each one of these. Due to the interconnectivity of this book, and the characters, and how almost every character exemplifies these themes, it's really difficult for me to do that. Instead, I want to just talk about how all of these kind of build upon each other to create this broken story of these broken people in this broken world. Running theme is everything's broken. Everybody's broken, the world's broken, the system is broken. Social alienation and societal norms. This evil, this destructiveness and this terribleness that happens in the story starts and is rooted in societal norms and expectations that are set in place by the toxic male model of the home, his father. His father defines, and his father's also like in this book via letters. So he is almost like a haunting background presence always in David's head that just won't go away. And his father also controls the money, which is not the conversation we're having right now, because David could have had the money, he could have lied, he could have helped Giovanni, but he didn't. And then what's the money for? Hella left him, Giovanni's dead, like what's the point? Probably commentary on capitalism that I do not have the expertise or capacity to talk about. But societal alienation and societal norms are what leads us down this destructive path of David putting himself away. David locking away the part of himself that is true. The part of himself that held Joey that night. The part of himself that Joey sought the next morning, but that David's like, no, he's not here anymore. That is what sets the groundwork for the destruction that happens later on in David's life, in Hella's life, in Giovanni's life. That is where it all begins. David's constant pursuit of the ideal masculine self is an extension of the societal norms that he is trying to exemplify. As mentioned earlier, he spends the entire book fixated on hypermasculinity, on not being emasculated, or not being the woman. He confronts Giovanni. He's like, I'm not the woman. And Giovanni's like, neither of us are. What are you even talking about? Like, Giovanni is a very simple, beautiful character, and he has such a profound understanding of his sense of self, almost to the point, I would almost say that the reason that Giovanni knows himself is because he doesn't complicate it. Giovanni also has a very broken background. He has already been hurt the most any person could have been hurt. He has already been broken. He has been nothing and has tried to rebuild himself from nothing. Giovanni that we know now is not the Giovanni from before. And I think when Giovanni laid that part of him to rest and said goodbye to it, he had the opportunity and the capacity to be anything that he wanted or anything that came his way. And it just so happened that David came his way. So when David is over here like, I'm not the woman, I will never be your woman, I am not a housewife, Giovanni's like, what are you even talking about? Neither of us are the women. You should be looking for a job. I'm trying to find a job. He's like, we're both trying to just provide for each other in this little room that they live in Giovanni's room that he's trying to hold on to. And David's pursuit of the masculine and the ideal manhood that he feels is in jeopardy next to Giovanni, that he should theoretically find next to Hella, and which Hella tells him, be the man in this relationship the way you're supposed to, and he just drops the ball at every turn. He can't be a man to Giovanni, he can't be a wife to Giovanni, he can't be a man to Hella. Hella has no ability to be the wife. She's like, let me be the wife because that's what I'm supposed to do. That's all I can be. And your inability to be the man, which is his only goal in life at this point, is to not be the woman, not to be emasculated, is just for naught. Because all he does is be spineless. All he does is avoid conflict. All he does is avoid the truth that everyone around him sees to a certain extent, and everyone around him is giving him just the grace to pretend that he's fooling them when he's not. Not even Hella. Hella knew there was something wrong. She just didn't want to be the one to uncover. She was waiting for him to tell her. She was waiting for all of this to come to light after he's come to terms with it. No, because he's not man enough for that. Because Hella had to be the man. Because Hella has explained how her masculine tendencies are not supported because she is a woman and she should not have a voice or an opinion. And Hella and David have some fairly complex and astute discussions regarding gender roles. So Hella is not dumb. I want to believe that that Hela is even queer and that she probably would have preferred to be the husband and the man in a relationship. That's why she goes back to David, Quinn posits, and says, I accept my role as the woman and you can be the man, but be the man in the relationship. Lead me, speak to me, because I have no voice. It's just a miserable irony that David's entire goal in this book, at every turn, every time he looks at David, every time he sees a pretty boy, every time he sees a boy for hire, he reminds himself, I'm a man and I'm masculine, and he hyperfixates on like hairy masculinity, on everything that is not pretty or dainty or delicate, all for him to be given the opportunity and the permission to a certain extent. Because if Hela wanted to run the show, she could run the show. And for him to just drop the ball. For him to be unable to step into those shoes, which I think is also part of the problem. David longs for that, but he knows he cannot fill those shoes. And that's fine. That doesn't make you less masculine. That doesn't make you more masculine or feminine or emasculated. That is simply the way you are. And David's fear, his constant fear of outing himself, of being something less than what he wants to be as an ideal, is not the evil of this story. The evil of this story is his inability to care enough about somebody else not to hurt them. It's the selfishness. It is fine to be afraid. It is fine to need help, to come to terms with yourself, but to hurt others because you don't want to bring question upon yourself, because you're trying to hold up this facade, it's selfish. And it's that selfishness that leads to so much pain. Identity and sexuality, shame and guilt are so closely intertwined as far as the themes go, because of the fact that David is unable to come to terms with his sexuality, because of the shame that he feels, because it is not the masculine ideal that he was raised to believe in. Because embracing who he is in his twisted mind means admitting that he is not a man. It's being less than a man, and he is unable to come to terms with that because of the shame and the guilt associated with what he wants of a partner, what he wants with himself, what he desires. It is a very long time in the book before David even hints at the fact that he might be accepting of who he is. And it is still riddled with shame and guilt, and he's afraid, and he needs to be selfish to protect himself. I understand why he's selfish. I understand why he is the way that he is. I am still angry at the fact that his selfishness hurts so many lives. I don't think that Giovanni was hung up on titles. I don't think that Giovanni was hung up on labels, or Hela. Hela understood labels as the evil norms that they were shoved into and life thrust upon them, and she accepted that she would make the best of the situation. Giovanni almost lived outside of that because he just never really seemed to care what it was. He didn't care that Jacques was a queen, that Guillaume was a queen, and that they loved beautiful boys. He was very much like, yeah, they like pretty boys. So what? They like to dress in boas. I find it not my thing, but whatever, like, sure. It's David that finds it disgusting. It's David that mocks it. And Jacques and Guillaume know, but they've lived through so much. I feel like at their age, they're like, we can afford it. We can afford to be ourselves, even if others find it weird. Like, we've lived so long, we can finally afford to just be us in a space that they created for themselves. The shame and the guilt that is prevalent at every turn in David's space, in David's life, self-inflicted, self-imposed, because nobody is making him feel shame. Giovanni very openly adores David. Hela accepts David, accepts that they will never be happy together. But it is David's internalized homophobia, the guilt and the shame of what he finds beautiful and what he desires, that just breeds so much unhappiness and toxicity. And his inability to come to terms with who he really is and his identity and his sexuality, whatever that may be, that just leads everyone down this horrific, destructive path. I don't think David even understands enough about himself to find it. He locked himself away so long ago. I think that the only way that he can define love and relationships with other people and himself is through this toxic hypermasculine lens that is based upon his alcoholic, violent father. I will take it a step further and say that even if David had had capacity and had wanted to explore that part of him, it would have been through the twisted lens of masculine equals violence. Masculine equals fear and toxicity and destruction. Even if he had wanted to explore that and to try to unpack that with Giovanni, I think the shame and the guilt would have been replaced by violence. Because one thing that David really wasn't throughout the book is violent. Yeah, he had violent encounters. The other parties were the violent ones because he sought out violence. Probably because he believed that he only deserved violence for being a shameful, dirty creature, right? Which he wasn't. But I feel like even if he had wanted to, his toxic past would not have allowed him to successfully work through his issues. And I think that's probably the most tragic part of it all. That even after the end of this book, if David tries to unpack it, he's going to end up somewhere violent and self-destructive again. With the knowledge and reassurance that he knows who he is, and he's going to look for himself through that violent, destructive, just perspective. He's going to see himself that way. He's going to look for himself that way. He will look for the violence in him to be the man that he believes he should be. I think that's all I have to say. This book has been probably one of the most influential pieces of literature I have ever read in my life. I think of this book when I pick up every queer book after this. Like after Giovanni's Room, I see almost the archetypes of who David is, of who Giovanni is, of who the characters are in so many other stories. Leo in Separate Rooms, I see David. I see Giovanni in Mitko in What Belongs to You. This book haunts me at every turn when I pick up another queer book. And I will probably read this book many times throughout my life. I've just read it once recently for the first time. Can't believe it, right? I'm so ashamed of the fact that it's taken me this long to read this book. But this book is a classic for a reason. It is the archetype. It sets the example of what all of these books are trying to unpack. The social commentary, the commentary on internalized homophobia, on the self-loathing, on the destruction, on the drugs, on the violence. This book sets the standard and the archetype, and this book resonates through every other book that I've read thus far. I haven't read a book that does a better job of exemplifying those themes than Giovanni's Room. It is such a phenomenal book. I love this book. I love this book so much. If you haven't read it, please read it. Please read this book if you haven't read it. Seriously, if you even debated reading it, please read it and then talk to me about it. Tell me what you thought. Tell me how you felt when you met Giovanni. Tell me how you felt when Hella told him I deserved better. Please tell me how this book made you feel. I love this book. I have put this off because I just don't feel adequate enough to talk about this book. But I want to put my meager 2 cents out there to find other people to discuss it, to help me unpack everything I've missed in this book. Supplemental texts, anybody that has, like, I've read so many essays on Giovanni's Room. I've read every article I can possibly find. If anybody has any other supplemental text they can recommend, any other studies, who has studied Giovanni's Room the way it's supposed to be, the way it's meant. An entire curriculum can be built off Giovanni's Room. Like, if someone has something like that, I want to read it. I want to continue to read it. And I'm going to read everything that James Baldwin wrote. He is a phenomenal writer. As an aside, I read the intro to this book. And I'm a writer. I write queer fairy tales, hence my intro. I'm Quinn Moone. I write queer fairy tales. I also write queer historical fantasy. I read the intro to this book. I read commentary by James Baldwin. And I was humbled because I read it and I thought, I sent my friend a text and I was like crying. It was the first time in my life that I asked, do you think I can be great too? Because that's what this book is. This book is a colossus. This book is enormous. It's just an overshadowing, overwhelming mountain of a piece of literature. It is iconic. It is a classic. I can't imagine my life without this book. I see this and I read that and I'm standing in the shadow of this colossus. And I'm looking up at it and I feel so tiny. I feel meager. I feel so inadequate next to this book, next to James Baldwin. And I asked my friend, I'm like, this is the first time I've ever cried and asked, can I be great too? And I've never had that question. I'm like, I want to cry. It was a very humbling question. I read this book and I realized what great writing was. Let me know what you thought, please. I would love to have a discussion. I'll catch you guys next time. Bye!